The bearing of a friend David stood alone at the edge of the small grave he had just dug, the earth soft under his feet. The sky was overcast, dark clouds hanging low as though the world itself mourned the loss. His hands shook as he held the shovel, staring down at the dirt-covered mound that held Max, the dog, who had been his companion for more years than he could count out. Max had been with him since he was a child, a loyal friend through every up and down of David's life. The thought of the old dog now lying beneath the soil made his chest ache. The memories flooded in racing through fields, curling up on the couch together, and the soft, comforting weight of Max's head resting on his lap. But now, all that was left was silence and an empty space where Max used to be. David had known the day would come. Max had grown weak, his steps slower with age, and the spark in his eyes had dimmed over the past few months. But that didn't make the reality any easier to face. David wiped his hand across his eyes, brushing away the tears that threatened to fall. He had never felt so alone. The sky above seemed to echo his sorrow, and the wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves of the nearby trees. David let out a shaky breath and crouched down beside the grave. The shovel clinked as he set it aside, his hands now pressed firmly against the cold earth. He whispered a quiet prayer, one he hadn't said in years, and then, as if on instinct, he reached for the small wooden marker he had carved earlier that morning. "Goodbye, Max," he murmured. "I'll never forget you." As his fingers brushed over the makeshift headstone, a strange sensation washed over him. It was as though the world had gone still. The wind, the birds, everything paused for just a moment. A tingling sensation ran up his spine, making the hair on the back of his neck stand up. David froze. Was it just the grief playing tricks on his mind? He looked around, half expecting to see someone standing behind him. But there was nothing, just the empty silence of the forest. He shook his head, trying to push the strange feeling away. It was nothing. Just his mind, reacting to the sorrow of losing his old friend. But something deep inside him couldn't ignore the unease that had settled in his chest. David turned back to the grave, a sense of unease hanging in the air. He looked down at the freshly buried mound, the finality of it settling like a heavy stone in his heart. His fingers trembled as he slowly began to stand, but before he could fully rise, a sound broke the silence, a low hiss that seemed to come from all around him. David's breath caught in his throat. He whipped around, searching the empty landscape, but there was no one in sight. The woods were quiet, still, as if holding its breath. He stood frozen, heart racing, trying to make sense of what he had heard. It wasn't just in his head. He had heard it clearly, a voice, a hiss like someone whispering just beyond his ear. It was low, almost threatening, and it made the hair on the back of his neck prickle with dread. Another hiss. The earth is fed. Wear the crown. Be emperor ... or be next. David's stomach dropped. The voice was clear, cold, and somehow ... familiar. It didn't make sense. Who was speaking to him? And what was this about a crown? His legs felt unsteady beneath him. He turned, expecting to see someone, maybe a passerby, a stranger who had wandered into the woods. But there was nothing, not a single person. Just the trees, the wind, and the empty gravesite. His mind raced as the voice echoed in his head again, even though it had stopped. Wear the crown, be emperor, or be next. What did it mean? David could barely make sense of the words. His heart pounded in his chest as he scanned the area once more. But still, there was nothing. Hello? He called out, his voice barely. More than a whisper. But the woods stayed silent, the only sound the wind rustling the leaves. His breath quickened as he realized he was truly alone. He took a cautious step forward, the uneasy feeling in his chest growing heavier with each passing second. Something wasn't right. But what? And why did it feel like that strange voice was waiting for him to do something? The hairs on his arms stood up, but his curiosity pushed him forward. David took one more glance at the grave, and something inside him stirred. Max had been his companion for so long, and now he was gone. His best friend was buried, and the strange voice, the cryptic words, were like a warning ringing in his ears. He shook his head again, trying to make sense of it all. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was the loss. But deep down, David knew something had changed. A new weight had settled over him, something dark, something unknown. It felt like the voice had been speaking directly to him, as if he was being drawn into something much bigger than himself. He turned to leave, but before he could take another step, the air grew colder, and the voice echoed again closer this time, as if it had been right beside him the entire time. Wear the crown, or be next. David's pulse raced, his breath shallow. A cold shiver ran through him as he looked around, but there was no one. The woods stood still, and he felt a knot twist in his stomach. It wasn't just his imagination. Something had changed. Something was watching him, waiting. And in that moment, David realized that the world he knew was no longer the same. His life, everything he understood, had just shifted, and now there was no turning back. The voice returns. David's steps were slow as he walked back toward his small cabin, the weight of the day pressing down on him, the chill of the evening. Air wrapped around him, but it wasn't the cold that made his skin crawl. It was the voice, the same voice that had spoken to him earlier at Max's grave. It had been faint at first, just a whisper in the wind, but it had returned again, clearer this time, and the words were etched into his mind. Wear the crown, be emperor, or be next. He couldn't shake it. The words echoed in his mind, repeating over and over like a warning he couldn't ignore. David tried to convince himself that it was just his grief playing tricks on him, that his mind had made up the voice as a result of losing Max. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. The voice had been real, and it had meant something. His cabin was quiet as he stepped inside, the familiar warmth of his home offering little comfort. He glanced over at the empty spot where Max used to sleep. The absence of his old friend hit him harder than ever. David hadn't realized just how much of his life had revolved around his dog. Max had been more than a pet. He had been his protector, his companion, his family. And now, with Max gone, the silence felt too loud, too empty. David set his keys down on the small wooden table, his thoughts still consumed by the strange words. Wear the crown, be emperor, or be next. The phrase seemed to hold power, like a secret he was meant to uncover. It wasn't just a warning. It felt like an invitation, a challenge. And the more he tried to push it away, the more it clung to him. A sudden knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. David's hand instinctively went to the gun he kept by the door. He wasn't expecting anyone, and the voice had made him nervous. He opened the door cautiously, peering out into the fading light. To his surprise, there was no one there. Confused, David stepped outside, scanning the quiet surroundings. The trees swayed gently in the wind, the leaves rustling softly, but there was no sign of anyone. He frowned, his mind still racing. Who had knocked? And why did it feel like something was just out of sight, hiding in the shadows? As he turned to go back inside, the voice spoke again. This time, it wasn't just a whisper. It was clear, direct, and cold. The crown is yours to claim. The universe waits for you. Don't make me repeat myself. David's heart skipped a beat. The voice was inside his head now, louder than before. It was as if the words had come from the very air around him, filling every inch of the space. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, his mind spinning with confusion. Was he losing his mind? Was he hearing things? Who are you? David asked aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. The room was still, and for a long moment there was no response. David held his breath, waiting for the voice to return, but nothing happened. The silence seemed to press in on him, suffocating him, making him feel even more alone. Just when he thought the voice had disappeared, it came again, but this time it wasn't just in his mind. It seemed to vibrate through the walls of the cabin, like the very air was charged with the power of the words. You are the last of your kind. The crown is meant for you. Accept your fate, or I will take what little you have left. David's hands trembled, his heart pounding in his chest. The voice was real. There was no denying it anymore. He felt it, heard it, and even now, it seemed to be lingering in the air like a heavy fog. He tried to ignore the chill running down his spine. Why me? Why are you speaking to me? He asked, his voice shaky, unsure if he truly wanted to know the answer. The voice didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched on for a few long moments, and David began to wonder if he had imagined it all. But then the voice returned, its tone calm, almost amused. You have been chosen. You may not remember, but you are destined for more than this small life you've made. The crown waits. All you must do is claim it. David's stomach twisted. Claim the crown? He didn't even understand what that meant. What crown? The voice seemed to sense his confusion. You are not the man you think you are. Your destiny is greater than you realize. Claim the power that is yours, or face the consequences. David felt the weight of the words settling over him like a heavy cloak. He could feel the pull of something dark and powerful, like a chain that had been placed around his heart, slowly tightening with each passing second. The idea of claiming this mysterious crown was both terrifying and tempting, like standing at the edge of a cliff and feeling the wind urging him to jump. But something else weighed on him. The consequences. He had to know what that meant. What would happen if he refused? He sat down heavily in his chair, his head spinning with everything he had just heard. He wanted to walk away, to forget about it all, but the voice had spoken to him twice now, and somehow he knew it wouldn't stop. He could run, but it would follow. Whatever this crown was, whatever this voice wanted, it was clear that David was involved now. He couldn't escape. Make your choice, David. The crown waits for no one. The voice faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving David alone in a silence of his cabin, his heart racing and his mind swirling with questions. What was happening to him? And what kind of power had he been called to claim? For the first time, David wondered if his life would ever be the same again. An offer. Too tempting, David couldn't sleep. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion and doubt. The voice that had spoken to him since the day he buried Max, the voice that had promised him power beyond imagination, seemed to be growing louder, more demanding. It wasn't just some passing hallucination. It was real, and David was starting to realize that it wasn't going to let him go. The voice had told him that he had been chosen, that the crown was his to claim, and that the universe was waiting for him to take control. The words repeated in his mind over and over like a chant. Wear the crown, be emperor, or be next. David tried to dismiss it, tried to focus on the quiet life he had lived before all of this. But the idea of power, the idea that he could change everything, was too tempting. What if the voice was telling the truth? What if he was meant for something greater than this small, solitary existence? He couldn't ignore the strange pull, the magnetic force that seemed to draw him toward something he couldn't fully understand. There was a power waiting for him, something tied to his very being. The idea of embracing it, of becoming something more, felt like a solution to all his loneliness, his isolation. But the fear was there too. The voice had warned him of the consequences if he refused, and though it had been vague, David couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible would happen if he didn't act. He had lost so much already, Max. The one creature who had always been by his side was gone. Could he really risk losing everything else? Could he live with the weight of what might come if he didn't take the crown? David stood up from his bed, his mind spinning. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in on him. He needed air. He needed space to think. Grabbing his jacket, he stepped outside into the night, the cool air biting at his skin. The stars above shone brightly in the clear sky, and for a moment, David felt a brief sense of peace. He walked aimlessly through the woods, trying to clear his head, but the words kept returning, echoing louder each time. Wear the crown. Be Emperor. The message had been simple, yet David couldn't understand why it felt so important. David stopped by the small clearing where Max had once loved to play, the spot now marked by the grave he had dug. He stood there, staring at the mound of dirt, the quiet stillness of the night making everything feel even more real. The air seemed to shimmer, almost as though it were alive. And then, just as he began to question his sanity, the voice returned, as clear as day. It's time, David. The crown waits. Choose or be destroyed. David's heart skipped a beat. It was no longer a whisper in his mind. The voice was everywhere now, surrounding him, filling every space with its chilling presence. He turned sharply, his breath shallow, as though the voice was right behind him. You could have it all. The power to change the universe, to rule as emperor. No more pain, no more loneliness. Take the crown, and everything you desire will be yours. David's knees felt weak, and he sank to the ground, his thoughts a mess. His heart beat loudly in his chest as he grappled with the offer before him. The voice was right, it promised him everything he had ever wanted. No more struggling, no more feeling small. He could have control over everything, but the warning still rang in his ears. Or be next. What would happen if he didn't accept? What would he lose? David stared at the ground, his hands trembling. The choice felt too big, too important. He wasn't ready for this. He had lived a quiet life, a life of solitude. The thought of ruling, of taking on such a responsibility, seemed impossible. And yet, the power that the voice spoke of felt so tempting. Could he really walk away from it? His breath caught as he thought of Max, his old friend, buried under the soil. Max had been the only one to truly understand him, the one constant in his life. And now, the voice had made him feel as though something was waiting for him. Something powerful. David stood slowly, wiping the dirt from his hands, his thoughts racing. He had to make a choice. But could he trust the voice? Could he trust the power it offered? For a long moment, there was silence, and David felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. It was like the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for his answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. What if I refuse? The voice seemed to pause, as though considering his question. Then it returned, its tone colder, sharper. Refuse, and the universe will move on without you. You will become nothing, just a shadow in the dust. David swallowed hard, the gravity of the decision sinking in. Refuse, and he would lose everything? Or accept and take the power of the universe for himself? He closed his eyes, trying to clear his mind, but the temptation was overwhelming. He had always felt small, insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But now, the voice offered him everything. The chance to change his destiny. The chance to be something more. He looked up at the stars, the endless expanse above him. Was he really meant for something greater? The crown, the power, it all seemed so far out of reach, and yet so close. The voice spoke again, as if reading his thoughts. "You know what to do, David. The crown is yours." David's hands clenched into fists. There was no more time to waste. This was his choice. The power was within his grasp. With a deep breath, David took the first step. He wasn't sure where it would lead, but he knew one thing. Nothing would be the same again. The mysterious stranger David couldn't stop thinking about the voice. Each day, the words echoed in his mind. Wear the crown, be emperor, or be next. They had become a constant hum, like the wind, soft but always present. The more he tried to ignore it, the louder it became. The power, the crown, it all seemed to hang just out of his reach, and he felt as if he were standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into the unknown. After a restless night, David decided to leave his cabin again. He needed fresh air, a break from the whirlwind of thoughts and doubts. The woods were quiet, peaceful, an escape from the chaos that had been building inside him. He wandered aimlessly through the trees, trying to clear his mind. But no matter where he went, it felt as if the universe was closing in on him, drawing him back to that single decision. Should he take the crown, or reject the voice and live a life of obscurity? The fear of the unknown gripped him tightly, but so did the lure of power, of control. It was then that he heard something, a rustling from behind the trees, too deliberate to be just the wind. David froze, every instinct on high alert. He wasn't alone. "Who's there?" He called out, his voice steady despite the unease creeping up his spine. From the shadows, a figure emerged. It was a man, tall and cloaked in a dark robe that blended with the forest's shadows. His face was hidden beneath the hood, but David could feel his presence, the air around him charged with something unsettling. "I've been waiting for you, David," the stranger said, his voice calm and measured as though he had known David's every move. David's heart skipped a beat. How did he know my name? The stranger stepped closer, his footsteps barely making a sound on the forest floor. "The voice has been calling to you, hasn't it?" he asked, as if the question had been asked 1,000 times before. David's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" He took a step back, instinctively placing his hand on the gun at his side. He didn't know who this man was or what he wanted, but something about him felt off, like he wasn't entirely human. The stranger chuckled softly, a low, knowing sound. "I am someone who has seen the path you're walking, David. I know what you've heard, what you've been promised. The crown, the power, it all seems so tempting, doesn't it?" David was quiet for a moment, his mind reeling from the stranger's words. "What do you want from me?" The stranger's lips curled into a slight smile, though his eyes remained hidden. "I'm not here to take anything from you, David. I'm here to give you a warning." "A warning?" David asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "Why should I listen to you?" The stranger stepped closer, his movements graceful but calculated. "Because, David, you don't know the full truth. The voice that has been speaking to you, it's not the only force at work here. There are others, darker ones, who seek the power of the crown for themselves. If you choose to wear it, if you accept the voice's offer, you will not just have power, you will be marked. You will be a target, hunted by those who would use you for their own purposes." David felt a chill run down his spine. "Who are these people? What do they want with me?" The stranger's gaze shifted to the trees around them, as though watching for something. "They are called the Seekers. Ancient and powerful, they have been searching for the crown for centuries. They believe that whoever wears it can control the fate of the universe, but they don't know what you've learned. They don't know what you are truly capable of." David shook his head, trying to make sense of the chaos in his mind. "I don't understand. If I take the crown, I'll be fighting against these Seekers, won't I?" The stranger nodded slowly, his voice heavy with truth. "Yes, and you'll be fighting alone. The crown will give you power, but at a cost. It's not just a symbol of rule, it's a weapon, and a dangerous one at that. It will change you, David. You may not recognize yourself once you take it. David felt a deep unease settle in his chest. The idea of power, of control, had always been tempting, but the reality of what he would face began to weigh heavily. On him, could he really fight the Seekers? Could he handle the cost of wearing the crown? The stranger seemed to read his thoughts. I know you're afraid, David, and you should be. But the crown is your destiny, whether you accept it or not. The universe has already set its course, and you are a part of it. David stared at the stranger, the gravity of his words sinking in. So what should I do? What's my choice? The stranger stepped closer, his eyes gleaming under the hood. You have two choices, David. You can walk away from the crown, live a life of peace, and risk being hunted by the Seekers. Or you can take the crown, embrace its power, and become the ruler of the universe. But you must understand, once you take it, there's no turning back. David's mind was racing, his heart pounding. He thought of the voice, the promise, of power, the weight of the crown, and the danger that came with it. Could he walk away from everything he had ever known? Could he live with the consequences of choosing power? The stranger turned to leave, his voice low and final. Remember, David, the Seekers are closer than you think. Make your choice and choose wisely. David watched as the figure disappeared into the woods, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The decision lay before him, as heavy and unyielding as the earth itself. His heart beat faster as the weight of the world seemed to press down on him. The voice had offered him power. But was it worth the price? David took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the forest. He knew that the time for indecision was over. Whatever path he chose would change everything. The first trial. David stood at the edge of the clearing, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. The world around him was quiet, unnervingly still, as if holding its breath. The mysterious stranger's words still echoed in his mind. The crown will change you, but it will give you power. You must pass the trial to claim it. What kind of trial? David didn't know what to expect, but he had no choice. The time to decide was now. There was no turning back. He had spent the past few days trying to prepare, both mentally and physically. The weight of the crown, the power it promised, had been gnawing at him, urging him to take it, to claim his destiny. But what was the trial, and how would he survive it? The air around him seemed to thrum with energy, as if the land itself was alive and waiting for something. David took a deep breath, his hands steadying at his sides, his thoughts racing. He needed to do this. For better or worse, he had accepted that this was his path, and he would not back down now. The ground beneath his feet shifted. The earth seemed to move of its own accord, the grass parting as a deep, dark chasm opened in the center of the clearing. The air turned colder, and David could feel the energy from the chasm pulling at him, drawing him toward it. Step forward, a voice said, but it wasn't the mysterious voice that had been guiding him before. This was different, sharp, commanding, and cold. David's heart raced. He had no idea where the voice was coming from, but he didn't hesitate. He took a step forward, his boots crunching softly against the earth. The air around him seemed to hum louder, and the chasm deepened, its dark edges stretching farther and farther, as if it were trying to swallow him whole. The voice returned, louder now, more insistent. You must face your fears, David. Your first trial begins now. You cannot go forward without proving you are worthy. David's throat tightened, but he stood firm. He had faced fears before, had lived through moments that had tested his strength. This, whatever it was, would be no different. Or so he told himself. The ground beneath him shifted again, this time more violently, as if the earth itself was angry. He barely had time to react before a shape emerged from the chasm. At first, it was nothing but a shadow, but then it began to take form something large, moving slowly toward him. David's breath caught in his throat as he saw what was coming. It was a creature massive, with glowing red eyes that pierced through the darkness. Its skin was a mottled gray, tough and jagged, like the surface of a stone. Its teeth gleamed sharp and white in the dim light, and its claws scraped across the ground with a terrifying screech. A creature like nothing he had ever seen before. David's legs felt heavy, as if the ground itself was trying to hold him in place. The voice echoed in his mind once more. Defeat this trial or fail. David could feel the fear creeping in, the familiar panic that came with facing something so far beyond his understanding. But there was no time for fear now. If he didn't act, if he didn't fight, there would be no future, no chance to claim the crown. The voice had made it clear. He had to prove he was worthy God. His hand instinctively went to the weapon at his side, a sleek, alien device that had been given to him during his journey. It didn't look like much, but the way it hummed in his hand, the way it fit into his palm as though it were an extension of himself, gave him a small amount of reassurance. The creature let out a low growl, its claws scraping across the ground. Again, as it advanced toward him, its eyes locked onto David, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. The forest around him was silent, watching, waiting for him to act. David took a deep breath and ran forward, his legs moving without thought. The creature lunged toward him with a speed that was almost unnatural, its jaws snapping shut in an instant. David barely dodged, rolling to the side as the creature's teeth scraped against the dirt. The fear inside him flared, but David pushed it down. He couldn't afford to hesitate. He had to think, had to move faster than the creature, faster than his fear. His fingers tightened around the weapon as he pointed it at the creature, but it wasn't enough. The creature was too fast, and it seemed to sense his every move. The battle was quick, brutal, and nothing like what David had expected. The creature was relentless, its claws slashing at him, its growls vibrating in his bones. David barely managed to block one of its strikes, his weapon firing off a blast that hit the creature square in the chest. But it wasn't enough. The creature roared in pain, staggering back. David didn't wait. He charged, diving toward the creature's side, using the weight of his body to knock it off balance. The creature stumbled, and in that split second, David saw his opportunity. He pushed all his strength into the final move, raising the weapon high and driving it into the creature's side. The weapon crackled with energy, and the creature let out a final, deafening roar before collapsing to the ground in a heap of lifeless limbs. David stood there for a moment, panting, his heart racing. The creature was down. He had done it. First trial was complete. The voice, calm and cold, echoed in his mind. You have passed the first trial. But remember, David, this is only the beginning. The crown will test you in ways you cannot imagine. David stood there, still catching his breath, as the chasm began to close, the creature's body dissolving into nothingness. He had faced his fear and come out alive, but the voice's words hung over him like a dark cloud. This was just the first test. The true challenges were still ahead. As the last of the darkness faded, David turned and walked away, his thoughts swirling. He had passed, but at what cost? What had he just unleashed by accepting the crown's offer? And what would the trials ask of him next? The weight of the crown was heavier than he had imagined. Betrayal and revelation, David couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had passed the first trial, defeating the creature with his own strength, but it had come at a price. The victory, though hard-earned, had only deepened the unease that clung to him like a shadow. The crown was supposed to give him power, The voice had promised him control over the universe, and while David had managed to survive the trial, he felt no closer to understanding what that power truly meant. What had the creature been protecting? Why was he chosen? What were the consequences of accepting the crown? It was all so overwhelming. And just when he thought he could push through the fear, something else happened that made his doubts impossible to ignore. The air around David felt different that evening, heavy, thick with tension. He sat alone in his cabin, staring at the small glowing device that had been given to him. The mysterious weapon seemed to hum in his hands, pulsing with energy, but it no longer felt like an ally. It felt like a tool of something far darker than he had imagined. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. David's heart skipped a beat. Who could be here at this hour? His first instinct was to grab the weapon, but something stopped him. He had faced enough enemies already. Who could possibly be left to confront him? He opened the door cautiously, his pulse quickening. Standing in front of him was the last person he had expected to see, the mysterious stranger who had warned him about the crown. The man stood in the doorway, his face shadowed by his hood, but his presence was unmistakable. There was an air of urgency about him, something more than just a casual visit. "David," the stranger said, his voice low, almost pleading, "you need to listen to me. You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into." David took a step back, his mind racing. "I've been doing what you told me," he said. "I've faced the trial. What else do you want from me?" The stranger's eyes darkened, his posture stiffening. "You think the trial was the test? That was only the beginning. You've been played, David. The crown what you think is. Power, it's not what it seems. It's a prison. And you've walked straight into it." David felt a surge of frustration. "What are you talking about? You were the one who told me to claim it. You said it was my destiny." The stranger sighed deeply, his expression softening. "I didn't want this for you. I didn't want anyone to wear the crown. You're not meant to be the ruler, David. You were meant to be free." "Free?" David's voice was incredulous. "From what?" "This power, the crown, it's all. I have left. What do you want me to do? Just walk away and pretend none of this ever happened?" The stranger shook his head, his eyes filled with regret. "You don't understand the full picture. The crown was made to control, not rule. It feeds on the souls of those who wear it. It's a weapon designed by an ancient Force One that no one has ever been able to escape. The universe isn't some playground to rule over. It's a battlefield, David, and the moment you wear the crown, you become its pawn." David stepped back, his hand gripping the doorframe to steady himself. "You're lying. I can feel the power. I can feel it inside me." "How can that be a lie?" The stranger looked at him with sorrowful eyes. "It's not a lie, David. The crown does give power, but at a cost. Every time you use it, it consumes a part of you. You'll become more like it empty, a shell of the person you once were. I've seen it happen before. The ones who wear the crown, those who embrace its power, lose everything. Their soul, their humanity." David's heart raced, the weight of the words crashing down on him. He took a step back, his mind spinning with the implications. "So what am I supposed to do? Just give it up?" The stranger's face hardened. "You have no choice. The Seekers are coming for you. And if you don't remove the crown, if you don't destroy it, you'll become one of them. You'll become a puppet of the force that created it." David's breath caught in his throat. "Destroy it? How? I don't even understand it. How do I undo what I've done?" The stranger stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "There's a way, but it's dangerous. You'll need to go to the Temple of Souls, deep in the mountains. That's where the crown was forged, and that's where it can be undone. But the Seekers will be on your trail. They will stop at nothing to take the crown. If they get it, they will control everything." David's hands shook, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and fear. And what if I can't get to the temple? What if I fail? The stranger's eyes softened, a hint of sadness in his expression. If you fail, David, you will become just another puppet, another tool in the Seeker's hands. And everything you've done will be for nothing. David felt a cold wave of fear wash over him. The weight of the crown, the power it promised, had felt like a blessing at first. But now it felt more like a curse, an anchor that threatened to drag him into darkness. He didn't know if he could trust the stranger, but the fear in his heart told him that what he was saying made sense. The crown was dangerous. He wasn't just fighting for power. He was fighting to keep himself from losing everything. "Do you think I can do it?" David asked, his voice trembling. "Can I stop it?" The stranger looked at him for a long moment, his gaze piercing. "You can, David. You're the only one who can." David looked down at the crown, still hidden in his pocket, its presence heavy. He had no choice but to face the truth. The crown wasn't the key to his future. It was a trap. And now, the only way out was to destroy it. But first, he had to survive the Seekers and himself. This part brings a major revelation about the true nature of the crown and the stakes David faces. The mysterious stranger's warning sets the stage for David's decision, pushing him toward a dangerous path while deepening the mystery of the crown's origins. The tension builds as David faces the terrifying choice of whether to keep the crown or destroy it. "You said." The final choice. The cold night air bit at David's skin as he stood outside the cabin, his thoughts swirling with uncertainty. The stranger's warning had left him shaken, and the weight of the crown in his pocket felt heavier than ever. He had been promised power, control over the universe, but at what cost? Was the crown truly his destiny, or was it a prison meant to consume him, to turn him into something else? David had spent the past few days trying to make sense of it all. He had traveled down a road he couldn't turn back from. The voice, the trials, the promises of power, it all seemed so real, so close. But now that the stranger had spoken the truth, David felt the stark reality of what was at stake. If he kept the crown, if he allowed himself to be consumed by its power, he might never be the same again. And if he rejected it, the Seekers would come for him. The universe itself seemed to be playing a game, and David was at the center of it. The choice before him was impossible. On one hand, the crown promised him unimaginable power, a chance to rule, to reshape the universe to his will. On the other, the crown threatened to strip him of everything he held dear, his humanity, his soul. He had been told that if he kept the crown, he would become like the Seekers, empty, controlled, a puppet in a cosmic war he didn't fully understand. But the voice that had been with him from the beginning, urging him to take the crown, whispered once more, filling his mind with its tempting call. "The universe waits for you, David. The crown is yours to claim, power beyond your wildest dreams. Take it." David clenched his fists, his heart pounding. The promise of power was so close now. He could feel it like a pulsing energy inside him. He was tempted, so tempted to take it, to become the ruler he had always dreamed of. He had never felt more powerful than he did now. But as the words echoed in his mind, he thought of Max, his loyal dog who had always been by his side. He thought of the simple life he had lived before all this chaos. Was that worth giving up for a crown? Was the price of power worth losing everything? The wind stirred around him, the quiet of the night suddenly overwhelming. David's mind flashed to the stranger's words. "The Seekers are coming. If you wear the crown, you will be hunted. If you refuse, you will lose yourself. There is no easy way out." David was torn. He couldn't stay in the middle forever. He had to make a choice. In the distance, he saw the faint glow of light. Something, or someone, was approaching. The Seekers? Were they already here, waiting for him to decide? Panic surged through him, but deep down, David knew that the time to decide had come. He had to choose. David reached into his pocket, pulling out the crown. It glowed faintly in his hand, the power inside it unmistakable. He stared at it for a long moment, wondering if it had always been meant for him. Was this his destiny? Or was it a trap waiting to consume him like it had done to others before him? A chill ran down his spine as the wind picked up. The ground seemed to shift beneath him, and the voice returned, louder now, more insistent. You are the last. You are the one who will rule. Claim your power, or let it slip through your fingers. David's hands shook as he held the crown. The weight of the decision pressed on him like a physical force. Could he truly wear it? Could he control the power it offered without losing himself in the process? The distant lights grew brighter, and the sound of footsteps reached his ears. The Seekers were getting closer. They were almost here. David closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He thought of all the things he had wanted, all the dreams of power, of control. He had never felt more alive, more certain of his strength. But he also remembered the warning. You will lose yourself. You will become a pawn of the Seekers. The voice in his head pushed him again, urging him to take the crown, to claim his destiny. But as the footsteps grew louder, David felt something shift inside him. He wasn't just a pawn. He wasn't someone meant to be controlled. He was David, his own man. And he was about to make his own choice. David turned, his eyes scanning the approaching figures in the distance. The Seekers were closing in. But in that moment, he realized something. He didn't need the crown to have power. He didn't need to be emperor to be free. He had the strength to make his own path, to fight for his future without being bound by the crown's temptation. With one final glance at the crown in his hand, David made his choice. He threw it into the wind, watching as it tumbled through the air and vanished into the darkness. The weight that had been on his chest lifted, and for the first time in days, he felt at peace. The footsteps grew closer. David stood tall, ready to face whatever came next. He didn't need the crown to define him. He didn't need it to feel powerful. The universe could wait. But David was in control now, and he was ready to fight for the life he wanted. As the Seekers arrived, their glowing eyes narrowing on him, David knew one thing for sure. He had chosen his path, and he would walk it without regret. This final part reveals David's decision to reject the crown and take control of his own destiny, despite the tempting offer of power. His choice to face the Seekers on his own terms builds the climax of his journey, showing his growth from someone unsure of his place in the universe to someone who understands the true cost of power and the importance of self-determination. The audience is left eager to see what David will face next, knowing that his story is far from over. Ask ChatGPT.